I was looking at the app that I use to find free items being given away, and I happened to come across the ad for this lawnmower. So I'll admit it looked a bit rough in the pictures, but now that I have it here, it's a lot worse than I thought. Well, unless you're really lucky, they can't all be winners, and as you're about to see with this one, it sometimes takes more than most are willing to invest, and the one thing you can't get back is time. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Poulan lawnmower, and the problem is that it's been sitting outside for a very long time and the owner told me that it won't start. I'm not going to tell you how to store your stuff, but prolonged storage outside comes with some interesting hazards, so be very careful. It is your stuff, and if you want to leave it under a tree for half a year, I'm okay with it. Now, I'm going to try and repair this lawnmower, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. So the first thing that I want to do is to take a look around the mower and see what kind of condition it's in, and man, is it bad. So there are three major problems with it, and the first one is the missing brake handle, which will need to be replaced. I'm not sure why it's missing in the first place, but it's now my problem to fix. The next major problem is a broken cable, and once you see how it's broken, it's pretty clear exposure to moisture didn't help out. Now, while looking at the cable, I also noticed that the anchor point near the engine was kind of bent. Now, it's not a big deal to fix it, but I have to wonder if that was done on purpose. There's also one wheel that's white in color while the rest of them are green, and even though it's not a big deal either, I would like to make it less noticeable. Now, I did not include this in the major problems list, but the handlebar is also quite loose, which makes using the mower very challenging. Of course, we need to check and see if we can get it started to confirm what they said about it. But we also need to check and see how much oil is in the engine as well as its condition. So based on its color, the oil looks terrible, but it only gets worse from here on because there's no visible oil on the dipstick. So before we try and start it, I'll add a couple of ounces of oil to the engine and then check the fuel tank. Now there is some fuel in the tank, but who knows how old it is. We're still going to give it a try though. Now there is one problem that we need to take care of before we try and start it, and that is we need to bypass the broken brake cable. The first reason is because it not only bypasses the flywheel brake so that we can turn the engine, but it also bypasses the safety for the ignition system. We also need a safe way to turn the engine off if it happens to keep running, so a zip tie around the spark plug boot will do nicely. Now the air filter has seen better days, but we'll get to that problem here in a bit. So the good news is that the engine started and ran for a couple of seconds, but the bad news is that it didn't stay running, which is about what we expected. Now before we get too far into fixing all the problems with this mower, I'm going to give it a quick cleaning. That's when I noticed that the blade was installed backwards, which is good news for us because it means the cutting edge is in perfect condition and only needing a minor sharpening. So yes, you can use a mower to cut the lawn with the blade installed backwards, however the cut on the grass isn't going to be very clean. The other reason I need to clean the mower is to find out how bad the mowing deck is. Now because this mower was left outside, rust will be a huge concern, especially if it was left sitting in the grass where the humidity will be the worst. Now surprisingly, it's not that bad. I've definitely seen a whole lot worse, but that's also when I realized why the handlebars are moving so much. Part of the bracket that holds it in place to the deck has rusted off, and there's also a bolt missing as well, which is still there on the good side. It's not going to be perfect, but if I replace the missing nuts and bolts, it should make the handlebars not move like they are now and make the mower easier to use. I also have a plan to deal with that oddball wheel, but I'll show you that plan once we get there. Now the only good thing that I can say is that at least the wheel is the same style as the others, otherwise I'd have to just replace it with a new or used one. Now there is a huge benefit to having a simple mower like this one, and that is the parts are also simple, meaning they're not very expensive at all. The only issue that you might have is the same one they were experiencing with this one, which is finding the right color, as it would seem that the green is quite hard to find. So the last area that we need to clean is right under the blower housing for the engine, and that's because sometimes small animals will make their homes in there. And if they do, their homes could get in the way of the airflow that helps to keep the engine cool, which then could lead to an overheated engine and then damage it. Now fortunately for us, we didn't have that problem, but there was some dirt and oil that was covering the cooling fins, which could be just as bad. So once we're done giving it its final rinse, we'll need to let it dry for as long as possible, that way all that water can evaporate from the mower. So this is the time where leaving it outside in the sun makes sense, however you'll need to keep it off the grass to allow the underside of the mowing deck to dry off as well. So this would be the time for us to take care of the wheels, and if you hadn't guessed it, I plan on painting the white wheel roughly the same color as the other ones. Now I know that some of you might be opposed to the idea, and I completely understand if you feel that way. But doing it this way is about the best way considering how difficult it is to find the right color wheel. So I did consider spraying a primer first, but I was afraid that doing so would make it a lot harder to get the color I wanted. So I did end up spraying multiple coats on the wheel, and even though it's not perfect, it certainly looks a whole lot better than it did before. The next thing that I want to do is to drain as much fuel from the tank as possible and see if it might be the reason why it didn't want to stay running. Now there wasn't very much fuel in the tank to begin with, but what came out of the tank doesn't look good enough to be used in an engine. I know it's difficult to tell, but what you're seeing at the bottom of the jar happens to be water. That means there might still be more in there that we didn't get out the first time, so to get the rest of it, I'll just use some paper towels instead of waiting for it to evaporate. We'll then move on to replacing that missing nut and bolt on the handlebar support. Now I would have liked to use more than one bolt and added a spare one, but I was concerned about weakening the metal by putting extra holes in an area that might be too thin due to rust over the years. Now luckily this mower doesn't weigh all that much, so the stress on the handlebars isn't that much either, and just replacing that missing nut and bolt should be just fine. So I ended up spray painting all the wheels, and the reason why is because there's almost no chance that you'll be able to tell which one was the different one. Now I'm pretty sure if you got close enough to the wheels and looked really hard you could tell, but from a user's perspective it'd be tough. Now to be honest, I kinda like the green wheels, and that's because it's harder to tell if it's dirty unlike when they're white in color. Of course, while I'm installing the wheels on the mower, I'm going to apply a generous amount of lithium grease to the axles just to make sure it's even easier to push this mower across the yard. Next, we'll install the new stuff that we had to buy, which was of course the brake handle and the cable for it. Now the handle was only $14, which wasn't terrible, but just having to order it in the first place was the sad part. Now the cable was only $7, which is about what I expected to be, so the $21 we had to invest so far wasn't too bad, but I'll talk more about it later on in the video. So it turns out that the air filter was not oiled up before installation, which allowed fine dirt to make it past it and get into the carb and to the engine. Now I don't plan on taking off the carb to clean it unless I have to, so for right now I'll just clean the air inlet the best I can. Now the same goes for the air filter. Because it's just foam, you can clean it and remove all that dirt and then oil it back up and then use it again. The problem though is that when it starts to crumble like this one is, there's no chance in saving it and you'll need to just replace it instead. Now one of the most overlooked items on a mower like this one is making sure that the blade is balanced. The reason I know this is because it's taken me years to realize myself, and I've been doing this hobby for quite some time. Of course, I knew that a blade that was off balance would cause the mower to shake a lot when running. But it was only recently that I realized what kind of damage could happen if the blade wasn't balanced, and it could be really bad. Now you don't need anything fancy, a simple nail in the wall will work too, but I will let you know that some tools are better than others and this cone balancer is perfect for the job. Now I did run into a problem that I've never had to deal with before, and that happened when I was trying to install the end of the cable to the brake assembly. The Z-bend would simply not fit in the opening on the arm, and after comparing the ends, the first bend on the cable was a tad too thick. So my choices were to modify the end of the cable to make it smaller so it would fit the opening, or make the opening in the arm a little bit bigger. Well, as you can tell, I opted for the second choice, and the reason why is because if I try and modify the end of the cable, it could break because of the type of metal it's made out of. The arm, however, is a bit more robust, so it can take being drilled out better than the other option. Once the cable is back in place, I'll then replace the plastic guard, then put some fuel in the tank and see if the primer works. Now this style of fuel system is very interesting as it uses pulses from the engine to work a pump to bring fuel up from the tank and into a well that's underneath the carb. I do believe the priming system also uses the fuel from the well, so I'll have to physically prime the engine first before the primer works again. Of course, if I wasn't too stingy and just filled the tank all the way to the top, this wouldn't be an issue either because the well would be filled too. The last thing we need to do is to put the new brake handle in place, connect the other end of the cable, and then prime the engine, and then try starting it. Now once the engine is started and ran for a little bit, it should have filled the well with fuel, meaning the primer should work now and we can start it normally. But before we do that, we need to install a brand new and oiled up air filter. That way it'll be able to capture the finer dust particles and keep them from getting into the carb and to the engine. Now you can use your oil of choice, whether it be motor oil, transmission fluid, or some other thin oil, but I will let you know that some oils work better than others. Once the filter is back in its box and installed back on the carb, we'll then prime the engine and do a longer test run. So this time everything went well except at the end because it seemed like it didn't want to stop. We'll look at it here in a bit, but right now we need to see if it'll start back up when it's hot. So the good news is that it started back up after running for about 5 minutes, but the bad news is that it's still having a problem stopping like it should. I'm pretty sure I know what happened, which was when I had to bend that arm down so I could drill the opening to a larger size. It must have also slightly bent the upper arm that makes contact with the ground wire to turn it off. Now the fix is pretty simple. All we have to do is bend the upper arm back into position so it can make better contact with the ground. Now once that's been fixed, we can then install the cover back onto the engine and do another test start, but I'll do that off screen since I already know that it works. So let's talk numbers. How much time and money did I spend on this project? Well, the money was simple. The handle was $14, the cable was $7, and the air filter was only $2. Now the spray paint was $5, although I didn't use all of it. That means the grand total was only $28, which isn't that bad at all. The problem comes up when you add the time up, which was quite a lot. This project spanned a couple of days from cleaning it, letting it dry, and then painting the wheels, so the times are all broken up, making it difficult to come up with a number. But if I had to guess, I'd say this project took all of 8 hours, which is too much considering how little this mower is worth. So my question is, would you have spent a whole 8 hours of your day on this mower? I sure hope not, because I don't think I'll get my money out of this one. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.